Within the criminal underworld, the Mara Salvatrucha gang is widely recognized as the most lethal. They brazenly violate the law and challenge anyone who dares to stand against them. However, in reality, gangsters are not nearly as dangerous as corrupt police officers who exploit their positions, as they can commit heinous crimes without ever fearing any consequences. So how exactly did everything get started? This is how the story goes. The film begins inside a car in a dimly lit parking lot. There are three men discussing a secret plan, a task they are forced to do under orders from a Russian mafia boss. They will also recruit 2 police officers to help carry out the operation together. 2 weeks later at the scheduled time, Russell is behind the wheel driving 4 people in a van, including his younger brother Gabe and the team leader Mike, plus 2 people named Marcus and Franco from the police force. After preparing their disguises and weapons, they arrive at a bank. 4 people storm inside while Russell keeps watch from outside. They only have 3 minutes before the officers arrive. Mike swiftly seized the chief executive officer and threatened him by displaying pictures of his family. The director had no choice but to comply and hand over the secret safe key. While Mike was busy opening the storage box, Gabe noticed the pile of cash and took a portion. The target box was then removed and taken directly to the prepared vehicle. Before they departed, Mike first planted explosives at the building entrance. With a sense of victory, the 4 of them hurried to leave the bank behind. By following the directions given by Russell, they continued driving toward the hideout. Then suddenly, their bag began emitting red smoke, as Gabe had accidentally grabbed a dye pack hidden within the money. This forced them to stop the car in the middle of the road. Mike quickly hijacked a vehicle while the others created a distraction. After setting the explosives, they hurried away from the traffic jam. In the underground parking lot, Marcus became furious at Gabe for acting outside the plan. Franco also drew his pistol, but Mike stopped him right away. As the leader of the operation, he did not want any internal conflict between them. The hijacked car was then burned, and they split up in different directions. Russell also scolded his younger brother for Gabe's actions. He should have been more vigilant, especially regarding the 2 police officers who just joined them. However, Gabe calmed his brother down, explaining that he and Marcus had been friends on the police force for a long time, before Gabe was fired for killing his partner. Afterward, while with Mike, Russell apologized for his brother's recklessness. Mike calmly replied that he and Russell were like family, because the 2 of them had been close friends since they served in the National Military Special Forces. Shortly thereafter, the pair arrived at a slaughterhouse marked as Russian Jewish. Mike then handed the safe box over to one of the mafia's associates. Upon arriving at the crime scene, an experienced detective named Alan was informed that the stolen deposit box belonged to a wealthy Russian millionaire. There were 4 robbers involved and their identities have yet to be uncovered. Meanwhile, at the Atlanta Police Department, a transfer officer was being dropped off by his loving wife. The captain gathered the staff as he entered the building. Shortly after, Marcus arrived and acted as if nothing was wrong. The captain then introduced the new officer, Chris, who happens to be Detective Allen's nephew. Without saying much, he was immediately ordered to work together with Marcus as his partner. From his apartment, Mike called Franco to check on him. Mike then said he would meet him in 2 days. As evening approached, Mike was suddenly visited by the mobster's men. He was then taken to meet his beloved son. His wife Elena was also present there, and it turned out she was the mobster's own biological sister. Her name is Irina Vlaslov, and she runs the criminal underworld with her husband who is currently imprisoned in a different country. In that room, there was even an FBI agent who was also working with them. Unfortunately, even though Mike had completed his orders, Irina still demanded one final task. She stated that his payment would be withheld until this task was finished. Mike, who was afraid his son would be hurt, could not bring himself to refuse. That night, Mike reached out to everyone to meet as soon as possible. However, Russell was suddenly ambushed while he was on his way. Meanwhile, at the abandoned warehouse, the 4 of them had just arrived. Mike then revealed that Irina demanded one final task before the payment was given. This made Franco quite annoyed because he felt like he was being played. Unfortunately, they could not refuse because Irina was also colluding with the FBI. A moment later, Russell's car suddenly appeared in a suspicious manner. They immediately approached the vehicle while cocking their weapons. Russell was then found in a dying and helpless state. Mike, realizing that his life could not be saved, reluctantly shot him. Back at his headquarters, the mafia boss chooses to ignore the phone calls from Mike. Meanwhile, Detective Allen reviews the CCTV footage and becomes fully convinced that these robbers are certainly no ordinary gang. When morning arrived, the four of them were already standing by the side of the highway. Mike reveals that Irina wants them to steal an item from the State Security Department building, a location that is surely heavily guarded by many security personnel. Therefore, they will require at least 10 minutes to complete the entire job. However, the police will certainly arrive at the scene just 3 minutes after the alarm goes off. Franco then proposes creating a 999 situation as the only way out. By noon, Marcus is on duty with Chris as normal. The same applies to Franco, who arrives at the murder scene, where the three heads of the Loco gang appear to have been brutally decapitated. Meanwhile, the crime scene is located right in the neighborhood of the Mara Salvatrucha, who are a rival gang. Calmly, Chris then tried to interrogate the gangsters there. However, the gang leader named Luis Pinto immediately threatened him. Without a second thought, Chris immediately handcuffed him and took him into custody. Marcus, having witnessed the event, promptly asked Chris to have a word.
Fuck you, Ora. That's exactly what you said, motherfucker.
In a private conversation, Marcus warned his partner not to act so recklessly because dealing with the Mara Salvatrucha gang is just inviting chaos. But Chris still did not care about the street rules. To him, justice must be served even if it costs him his life. That night, the four of them gathered once again to discuss Plan 999, which is a police code that signifies an officer has fallen in the field. This means that if they manage to kill one police officer, then every other unit will be deployed to the scene. And by doing so, they will have enough time to carry out the robbery of the Department of Security building. Meanwhile, Detective Allen was apparently visiting his nephew's house. He then invited Chris to a cafe to have a talk, where the idealism Chris showed in his duty made his uncle worry about his safety. This is because criminals will always be around and they will not hesitate to kill anyone at all. At that very same moment, Mike was also visited by Elena along with their child. This meeting was conducted in total secrecy, completely unknown to the mafia boss. From the very beginning, Mike's relationship with his wife was truly filled with dilemmas. Yet Mike persisted, doing it all for the sake of his beloved son. The following day, Mike returned to confront the mafia boss, burning with intense rage. The death of Russell, whom he considered his own brother, left him consumed by a desire for revenge. However, Irina calmly insisted that his task must be carried out immediately. Seeing that her husband was clearly troubled, Chris's wife, Michelle, tried her best to calm him down. She knew he was upset because he had been assigned a less than ideal co-worker. At the hot springs, Marcus and his gang finally decided that Chris was the perfect target to sacrifice. Because Detective Allen would surely focus all police on the crime scene if he heard his nephew's life was threatened. A short while later, Mike drove Gabe back home, where Gabe voiced his strong objections to sacrificing another person. Because he remained deeply traumatized by the mistake he made when he killed his partner while serving on the police force. Unfortunately, Gabe had no other solution, so Mike scolded him harshly. That day, Marcus took Chris to the Mara Salvatrucha gangster neighborhood to meet his informant. Chris, who was asked to go inside, refused and chose to wait in the car instead. He then attempted to strike up a conversation with two local kids, until Marcus finally told him it was time to leave. In the course of his investigation, Detective Allen also met with his informant at a local brothel. After being paid, the pimp revealed something shocking. One of his prostitutes had spoken about her boyfriend acting strangely after a bank robbery. With that information, the detective could now begin to uncover the identities of the fugitives. In relation to the beheading case within the Mara Salvatrucha area, the police finally identified the perpetrator as a man working for the Mexican cartel in drug trafficking. Without any further delay, a specialized unit was dispatched to his apartment, where Chris led the raid armed with a tactical shield and his weapon. However, the fugitives suddenly began firing blindly from the window, while the troops continued to push forward and climb the stairs. After breaking down the door, the police searched the house cautiously. Sadly, there was nobody left inside except for a small toddler, because the fugitive had already fled through the back door out to the main road. The police unit that was continuing the chase was suddenly attacked by other gang members, so they had to scatter and leave Chris and Marcus on their own. Seeing the fugitive discard his weapon, Chris moved in quickly to make an arrest, but it was merely a ruse and the fugitive fired his gun instantly. Fortunately, the bullet failed to pierce his body and only struck his protective vest, so Marcus continued to chase the fleeing fugitive in a hurry. After feeling somewhat recovered, Chris immediately followed the trail of blood along the road, where he discovered them both fighting over a weapon inside an alleyway. Without waiting any longer, Chris immediately shot the fugitive in the head. As evening approached, the police had already apprehended all the gang members involved in the battle. Their operation concluded with the success they had hoped for. This success also made Marcus's credibility as an honest cop even more convincing. The day after, at a bar, Chris and Marcus celebrated their victory. The two of them seemed to be getting closer as colleagues. At a fancy restaurant that night, Mike was called by the mafia boss again. He was then put on the line with his wife and child who were currently away on vacation at some unknown location. Understanding that this was a clear threat, Mike stood firm in his commitment. The mafia boss then showed him the target that Mike had to finish within the remaining 24 hours. Meanwhile, after his brother died, Gabe and his girlfriend lived on drugs. Marcus, who was in the middle of partying with his fellow officers, was taken by surprise when he was suddenly confronted by him. In a fit of rage, he dragged Gabe outside and beat him up right then and there. It appeared that Gabe was trying to warn Marcus against repeating the mistakes he had made in the past. However, Marcus did not care and continued to strike Gabe until he was completely incapacitated. Based on the information provided by the pimp, Detective Allen has finally managed to identify Gabe and his girlfriend. It turns out he is an ex-cop who was dismissed for shooting his own partner. However, the court did not have enough evidence, so he could not be imprisoned. Without waiting long, Gabe's girlfriend was then successfully trapped in a drug deal. Left with no other options, Gabe's girlfriend Leah was interrogated and ended up revealing everything. This included the murder of Russell and the identity of his partner Mike. After being investigated, it was discovered that both were former elite troops in the army. However, they later became entangled in a case of arms smuggling to the Russian mafia. At the same time, the detective's assistant, Trina, secretly followed the fugitive. Gabe then stopped suspiciously in front of a house. Detective Allen was given the address and immediately mobilized his forces, only to find that the house was actually the nephew's family residence. A short while later, Gabe heard the sirens and immediately fled the scene before the police could arrive. Chris was certainly bewildered by his uncle's arrival with the police. Detective Allen also did not know why Gabe had gone to the nephew's house. The next day, Franco informed Mike that Gabe was now a suspect. Without saying much, Mike contacted Gabe while holding his girlfriend hostage. Frightened, Gabe promised he would go as far away as possible. That morning at his office, Detective Allen asked his subordinates for an update on the investigation. They reported that Gabe and Mike were still missing. The judge blocked the interrogation of Irina, the Russian mafia boss. The detective, already uneasy, flew into a rage. Simultaneously, the trio prepared to execute their final mission. Marcus needed to kill Chris to ensure all police units would converge on the scene. This would allow Mike and Franco to successfully storm the National Security Building. A moment later, Marcus was already with Chris, heading toward an abandoned housing complex. Marcus claimed he needed to meet an informant. Parked at the National Security Building, Mike and Franco were ready and waiting inside their car. They were waiting for a report from the police radio with the code 999, which means an officer has been killed in the line of duty. In the dim light, Marcus and Chris kept searching the rooms. When his partner was distracted, Marcus quickly vanished into the darkness. Chris realized what happened and tried to reach him by radio, but there was no answer. Pinto had actually been there secretly all along. A short moment later, Chris was startled to see a figure he did not recognize, who turned out to be Gabe trying to warn him. However, Chris was filled with panic. Suddenly, Pinto attacked from behind, leading to an exchange of gunfire. During that sudden and brief battle, Gabe had been shot and was now dying helplessly. Chris, who still did not know who the person in front of him was, immediately tried to assist him. Marcus then appeared, so Chris asked him to call an ambulance immediately. But suddenly, seeing Marcus out cold, Chris called the code 999. Mike and Franco, having waited long, finally smiled. The two of them then immediately moved in and neutralized the security guards.
Let's go!
Meanwhile, Detective Allen was notified and he rushed over to the scene immediately. He still did not know who had been shot, but it was clearly from his nephew's unit. Because of that, he ordered all the police officers to surround the location. With a calm demeanor, he continued driving down the highway.
No!
With explosive devices strapped to the bodies of the officers, Mike then activated one of them. Those who did not have the safe code could only cry and beg for pity. So without a second thought, Mike immediately blew up the room door by force. After successfully entering, he began cutting the iron safe that stored the secret documents.
7 minutes.
While still on the highway, Detective Allen received a report that the National Security Building had been broken into. However, that was not more important to him than his niece's life, so he then only ordered Trina to check on the situation. After successfully opening the safe, Mike immediately took the suitcase inside. Together with Franco, he then herded the officers toward their car, where the tactical team was apparently already waiting with vigilance. The two of them who were driving the car out were then showered with blind gunfire.
Weapons free.
Arriving at the scene, Detective Allen searched for his nephew. Finding that Chris was perfectly fine, finally put his mind at ease, while a dying Marcus was airlifted by helicopter for medical care. Inside their vehicle, Mike and Franco had sustained several gunshot wounds, but fortunately, the bullets missed their vital organs, saving them both. At the crime scene, Chris revealed to his uncle that Gabe had previously met Marcus at a bar, and shortly after, Franco arrived and interrupted their conversation. Once they had been introduced, he proceeded to inform them that Pinto had been successfully taken down. That night, after Mike had completed his final assignment, he was met by the mafia boss, who had prepared a special gift for his beloved child. Without saying a single word, Mike proceeded to hand over the confidential data that he had successfully managed to steal. The mafia boss also gave him a bag full of money as a reward. Realizing they didn't bring his child, Mike flew into a rage, but his weak body was easily taken down. Irina then stated that she no longer wanted Mike interfering with her family, which meant he had to leave his sister's life and let go of his son. They proceeded to leave, taking along the gift Mike had provided as his parting gesture. Using the last of his strength, Mike stood up in agony, then reached for his phone inside the car to place a call. Not long after, the mafia's crew exploded in the distance. While Chris was keeping watch at the hospital, his wife approached him with tear-filled eyes, as Marcus remained in a coma with a bullet lodged in his brain. A police officer then informed Chris that Pinto's body had just arrived. Chris, while examining the belongings of the gang leader, discovered something quite unusual, specifically a piece of paper detailing the exact time and place when Pinto attempted to murder him. After he had killed the mafia boss, Mike was suddenly stopped on the road by a police officer who turned out to be Franco, who then proceeded to ask him about the money. Mike said he got paid, but then a cop found a note about when and where Pinto tried to kill him. Still not understanding what happened, Chris went alone to the Mara gang's neighborhood. Using a few threats, he then asked a young boy whether Marcus had spoken with Pinto in private. The boy, who did not dare to lie, reluctantly confirmed it. A few moments later, Chris went straight to his uncle's house. He voiced his suspicions that Marcus had been involved in the attempted murder and the robbery. So now the identities of the suspects are slowly being revealed. Only one more person remains to be investigated to make it 4. That afternoon, Leah's body was discovered in a state of decomposition without the killer being known. Detective Allen, who suspected the perpetrator was a police officer, then contacted Trina. He asked who the officer was that had reported the death of Leah while he was driving to the location where her body was found. Meanwhile, Chris returned to visit Marcus at the hospital by himself, where Franco unexpectedly showed up and asked him to accompany him to the office to finish a report, and he went without any suspicion. Chris immediately followed him toward the elevator, but his uncle then called to inform him that Franco was actually the final suspect in the robbery. Yet he remained calm. Chris prepared for any possibility, and Franco, feeling hesitant, said he would wait for him at the police station. When he arrived at his car, Franco was instantly shocked to find Detective Allen already sitting in the back seat, and a moment later, the sound of a gunshot rang out from inside the vehicle. Without further delay, Chris immediately reported code 999 and slowly approached Franco's car with his gun drawn, finding Franco dead and Detective Allen also shot.